us. You're watching M Live. It's just 1 minute past 6 a.m. My name is Zainab Ismail, and you can see I'm not alone in studio today. Very good morning, Leila.
Hi, how are you?
Great. Thank you for joining us on M Live.
I'm glad to be here because we're talking about my favorite topic.
Indeed.
The continent.
How was the morning for you? Very cold? Too early?
I'm usually a morning person because I have to go through stuff with my kids, but then having to drive to work is a different scenario because I'm usually stuck in traffic by 7:30 in the morning. But at 5 in the morning, it's like a breeze when you're driving to a nation center.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's no traffic at this time.
No.
Welcome to this new world.
All
right, well, look, we have a number of stories that we'll be taking a look in just a moment. And also what's in the dailies. We have all the papers here. I have the Daily Nation, the Standard, the Business Daily, as well as the Star. We'll also be taking a look at the East African in a moment. But also, very interestingly, the point of conversation this morning, the leaders of the 55 member states of the African Union will be meeting for their 36th ordinary session. In fact, they are meeting of the AU Assembly. This is between the 18th and the 19th of February. It's happening in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, 60 years after the birth of the Organization of the African Unity, over 20 years of the AU, and 40 years before 2063. This meeting serves as an opportune time for the organization to take stock of the wins and lost opportunities of the AU meeting and the organization's plans to meet its objectives. That is what we'll be discussing in a moment. And Leila, I know this is an area of interest for you. You've covered issues of the African, region, the continent, also within the, the region, just within the East African region.
EAC, yeah.
So that will be quite interesting, to just have a look at where we are so far in the backdrop of this meeting that is happening in Ethiopia, right?
So many things are going back into my head at the moment. Agenda 63, the Africa that we want. And this is a conversation that started in 2021, and we want to open up Africa as a business hub, the Africa free, the Africa continental free trade area. What are the successes? How will it be adopted by the African community, and what are some of the challenges? And those are some of the things we are talking about. Somalia, Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a very unstable Western Africa. And for many Kenyans who are living under a rock, there is a major election in Nigeria. President Uhuru Kenyatta will be part and parcel of that conversation, and I'm looking forward to engaging on so many matters on my favorite subject, like I said.
Indeed,
Mama Africa.
Mama Africa, indeed. And look, we'll be introducing our panelists in a moment, of course, right after the news, and we'll be telling you who will be part of the panel to have this conversation. Very interesting. So you want to stay tuned for that. Remember, you can join us on our social media platforms. The hashtag we're using this morning, as always, AM Live NTV, at NTV Kenya, at Zainab Ismail. You can also tweet at Leila Mohammed. We'd like to hear your thoughts on what we intend to discuss this morning. Well, let's get to some of those stories now. Residents of Tiaty in Baringo County have expressed their fears on the planned security operation that seeks to put an end to banditry in the North Rift region. This comes as the amnesty to surrender illegal guns has come to an end.
Panic has gripped Tiaty sub-county following the operation that is set to begin on Friday. A spot check around the town saw businesses closed, transport paralyzed, and some people were seen fleeing the town for fear of the unknown.
Tuliposikia kwa president wetu mpendwa ya kwa operation na kutakuwa na curfew, watu walitoroka. Curfew kwa sisi ni kama vile ukiona nyoka kiingia kwa nyumba, unaogopa kuingia hiyo nyumba. Tumeogopa hiyo kitu kwa ukweli. Watu hapa tulikuwa na wanabiashara 300 na mpaka saa hii wamebaki wanabiashara chini ya 300.
The planned security operation has sent shivers across, evoking memories of previous operations, including the one done in Mount Elgon to neutralize the Sabaot Land Defense Force rebels, which saw innocent lives lost and property destroyed.
Sababu sisi ndio tumekuwa Calbridge kila wakati curfew. Secondly, tungeomba serikali kwamba curfew iwe kitu ambayo inatofautisha. Huyu ni mtu mkora ama, sababu kuna saa hii kuna sana watu wanatumia curfew kwa njia nyingine ya kujifaidisha. So hiyo ndio kitu tungeomba, watafute njia mzuri ya kutusaidia wafuate mkora, na sisi wale hatuna makosa tufanye biashara zetu, tuendelee na maisha yetu.
With the lapse of the 3-day ultimatum to surrender illegal firearms, security apparatus now say they will swing into action and smoke out the bandits from their hideout.
Mpaka sasa sijapata hata bunduki moja, lakini na expect kwamba bunduki ziko njiani zinakuja. Naomba machifu waongee na wananchi, wasingoje paka wapigwe ndio warudishe bunduki. Kama uko na bunduki ambayo unajua ni haramu, operation iko na hiyo operation ni.
We are pushing them further and further down the valley, and I know with the impending operation, of course, their days are numbered. All our officers on the ground in the affected areas, that is Tiaty, the entire Tiaty constituency, part of Baringo North and also part of Baringo South, are under curfew for the next 1 month. What does that one mean? That civilians are not allowed to move from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. For the officers now to patrol during the night and to ensure that criminals do not move from one point to another, trying to escape whatever is going to come.
Ruth Sarnoi, NTV, Baringo.
Well, Marsabit County has registered displeasure with the Ministry of Interior for failing to include the vast county among areas prone to banditry in the recent directive to uproot bandits. The worry is that those targeted could easily elope and use the county as the hiding area. Zacchaeus Mosame has more.
Days after 8 people were brutally murdered in Gelkurkum village, 3 of them being children, Marsabit County leadership is concerned with the rate of insecurity in the region. The leaders who spoke before
Isam wanafanya operation in Samburu na wanaacha Marsabit County, then tuwe prepared enough kwa insecurity kuwa in Marsabit County.
Sababu majambazi wamekuwa wengi sana na wako na silaha nyingi. Kuna silaha nyingi katika mikono ya majambazi, wahalifu wengi, na askari ni wachache. Wakati mwingi hawana tools ya surveillance mzuri ya kuweza kuweka usalama, na wanaingia katika mitego like ambush ya majambazi na kuweza kumalizwa kama juzi ambao mmesikia. Sisi tunatoa suggestion yetu, tumetoa suggestion yetu.
But Marsabit County Commissioner David Saruni has assured residents that the security team is vigilant and that no bandit will find refuge in his area of jurisdiction.
Katika ile hatua ambayo imechukuliwa jana na His Excellency the President, niliona Marsabit County iko. Hata nilikuwa natoa maoni hapa nikasema sijui Marsabit County kwa nini imekosekana, kwa sababu we are really suffering. Kama Samburu iko hapo karibu na watu wetu wakisafiri wanapata shida wakivuka Merile, then tunaumia. Tunasikia hata majambazi wengine wakikuja kuchukua ng'ombe, wengine wanasema kwamba wanatoka Samburu. Then unaona tunatatizika moja kwa moja. So my suggestion is Marsabit ingekuwa kati ya zile counties ambazo rais angepeana wale ambao angechukulia hatua zile ambazo jana alichukua, ili tuko considered na tuwe na amani katika Marsabit County.
Zacchaeus Mosame, NTV.
Now, a joint investigation by The Guardian and Forbidden Stories has unearthed that 2 Kenyans who are close allies of President William Ruto, one of them a cabinet secretary, may have been hacked by Team George before the elections. That's a covert unit that specializes in hacking and disinformation to distort reality and spread online propaganda. The expose, however, does not indicate who the client was and what was the motive behind the hacking. NTV's Melita Oletenges reports.
An Israeli hacker gained access to the phone of a Kenyan election strategist who was working for President William Ruto ahead of the August 2022 general election.
I'm really bad at directions, I apologize.
According to an expose by a consortium of journalists from 30 different outlets, the hacker, Tal Hanan, is the head of a clandestine group of Israeli contractors, Team Horge, who claimed to have hacked, sabotaged and automated social media disinformation campaigns to influence 33 elections globally, 27 of which were successful. The bill ranges between 50 to 75 million shillings per month. The reporters involved in the investigation conducted a year-long undercover investigation into the group known as Team Jorge, meeting with Hanan in London, Paris and Tel Aviv while posing as political consultants. Reporters received documents and recordings that revealed the team's procedures as well as covertly taped the sessions. Hanan then demonstrated how access to Telegram could be manipulated to sow mischief. Hanan seems to send a message from the Kenyan strategist account to one of their acquaintances. They then go ahead to show the degree of control they have over the phone hacked.
See this Telegram now? Yeah. Okay. So this is also some minister of some country. I can go, I can check all his call. Okay, he's calling Dr. Yeah. And I can go to any chat and see what they are saying. He's telling him this and that.
Disinformation distorts reality and spreads online propaganda. Team Jorge claims to control more than 30,000 bots, a social media account that pretends to be a human, multi-layered with different corresponding accounts across other social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and Telegram. Hanan says he has achieved this by exploiting vulnerability and using the global signaling system SS7. Speaking to NTV, Dennis Itumbi, a William Ruto stalwart, admits, and I quote, "My Telegram account was hacked and used to join several political groups." End of quote. The underworld of disinformation expose has opened a Pandora's box in keeping with the contested outcome of the Kenyan election. The expose does not say who had hired the hackers or who bagged President William Ruto's campaign strategists. Melita Oletenges, NTV.
Now, the battle in the northern part of the Rift Valley against cattle rustling and banditry has been a long and painful journey for the residents and a challenge for 5 administrations since Kenya got her independence in 1963. Now, with each attempt at curbing the vice, successive governments have had wins and losses, with the cycle revolving with no end in sight. Now, President William Ruto is now having the headache of dealing with a menace that in the previous life he claimed was allowed to thrive due to a move by his former boss to fight him politically. Leila Mohammed dissects his moves since his time as deputy president and what lies ahead.
The security or lack of it in the North Rift has been President William Ruto's scheme of things well before he assumed power. While campaigning in Turkana just before the 2022 general elections, a tough-talking President William Ruto called out the government he served in for letting the people of that region down on their basic human right to life and property.
Mnalipa ushuru kama Wakenya wengine, mambo yenu ya usalama ya watoto wenu, usalama ya mifugo yenu, usalama ya maisha yenu, ni haki yenu.
Despite government efforts at sending out special teams in the area, officers have been caught in the line of fire as they battle an enemy well equipped and one who sometimes has had a better understanding of the terrain they have traversed since childhood.
Nimemwambia Professor Kindiki atoke ofisi Nairobi, aende aishi kule North Rift mpaka hiyo mambo ya wananchi kupoteza maisha yao iishe.
The infiltration of illegal arms into the country via porous borders is a matter that the current commander-in-chief has stated will be a priority in his administration.
Proliferation of illegal firearms in the wrong hands is part of the challenge we are facing with even the cattle rustlers, the terrorists and all these other criminal operators. And that is why I say the CS, Professor Kindiki, his peers, Mr. Omolo, are properly guided on what we should do as government to rein in on these runaway cooks.
Still, the guns haven't gone silent and the attacks have kept coming. The antagonists in the area have dared the security systems, even seeming to call the commander-in-chief and his cabinet secretary for interior in a bluff on managing the situation in that region.
It is not if, it is when they will stop. They must. There are no two ways about it.
When matters seemed to get out of hand, a much called for approach by the leadership there was granted by the president this year.
Kwa sababu wale watu wamekuwa wajeuri, wamekuwa na kiburi mingi. From tomorrow we are moving into that area, and we will not leave that area until every illegal gun has been returned, until all children have gone to school, until we have stopped this menace.
The current operation seeks to disarm the communities within 72 hours, a move tried and tested in the past, with many owning more than one firearm and only letting go of what they don't need.
Mambo ya wizi wa ng'ombe, mambo ya mauaji ya wananchi kiholela na wakora na watu wachache, hiyo biashara itakoma na sio tafadhali, itakoma.
In his quest to seek the highest office in the land, the current commander-in-chief claimed that the killing of over 150 people in the Kerio Valley belt in the last 5 years would have been averted if only politics hadn't taken center stage in a battle of wits.
When we came into the handshake arrangement, a false narrative, very unfortunate false narrative, was rolled out that, all these national police reservists in Elgeyo Marakwet, in Baringo, in West Pokot, were actually a militia that William Ruto would use at some point.
He claims that because of political reasons, the security situation in the North Rift suffered as government took the steps to withdraw arms from civilian police reservists, leaving the communities they protected exposed and vulnerable.
Plan was, let's provide a national police reserve. Then let us construct the roads. Then let's provide water infrastructure. And then let's provide school infrastructure. That way, you ease out people from that situation where they are today to a new environment.
As he sends his troops on the ground in the latest push to deal with the criminal elements there, President Ruto has asked them to be guided by the oath they swore to serve and protect. Leila Mohammed, NTV.
All right, ideally I would say Leila, thank you, but Leila, thank you. You're in studio with me today. All right, so time to just take a look at a couple of the stories that have been highlighted in the dailies. And I'm going to begin with the Daily Nation here. This is what we have on the very front page of the Daily Nation. How Israeli hackers meddled in the elections. Well, a group of Israeli disinformation contractors hacked into email and social media accounts of senior election officials and President William Ruto's close allies just days before the 2022 polls. An investigative report has now revealed. However, both the Kenya Kwanza and Azimio Camps have denied hiring any foreigners. That's a full splash on pages 2 of the Daily Nation. Leila, quite interesting. This is something that is now developing.
And it's interesting because in the next few days we are hoping to see how the Kenyan media will be able to dissect this very important information from The Guardian and other stakeholders who undertook a year-long research on this. And it's not only Kenya, 33 countries across the globe were investigated, and some of these individuals were captured on video taking quite a colossal amount of money. So it means some of those concerns that we've had in the previous elections could have some semblance of truth in them, but then until we really dig deeper into these conversations, and when we'll be able to know the truth. Dennis Itumbi has also said, yes, his Instagram account was had issues, but he does not use it, not Instagram, Telegram account, but he doesn't really use it for communication. So we'll know more in the days to come.
Indeed. All right, so right adjacent to it, Raila's purge on Azimio rebels. We're going to take a look at that. It's on pages 4. So I'm going to take a look at that right here. Let me move to the second page of the Daily Nation. Ruto strategists, IBC officials hacked by Israeli days to polls. That's where the full page of that report is. A man and his little gem, how I hosted the former president and
Uhuru Kenyatta during the burial ceremony of the late George Magoha in Siaya County. Quite an interesting social piece of this man, and how he was able to meet and greet him with power,
right,
per se.
Oh wow, okay, so that's something you will be quite interested in. Moving forward, Dulo fast casualty as Raila begins Azimio Rebels purge. You can see a number of members there. The Senator Fatuma Dulo, you have Sabina Chege, as well as Professor Margaret Kamar there. The Azimio La Umoja One Kenya coalition, Raila Odinga beginning a purge against what the Azimio team terms rebels, as he signaled the return of anti-electoral agency protests in an escalation of resistance against President William Ruto's administration. Yesterday as well, according to those members, Isiolo Senator Fatuma Dulo became the first casualty after she was removed from the Senate Minority Whip position and replaced by her deputy, that's now Senator Ledama Olekina, and reports indicate that nominated MP Sabina Chege is serving as the National Assembly Deputy Minority Whip, and KANU nominated Senator Margaret Kamar, who sits in the Senate House Business Committee, are also targeted for removal as a fallout of a State House visit rocks the coalition.
As you listen to Vincent Odo's statement yesterday, they will also be going for the legislator whom they had appointed to go into the East African Legislative Assembly. They wish to recall him because of his dalliance per se
with the president,
the current regime.
All right, so this is also a very interesting political development there. You can get that full report. Nyoro takes on Gachagua in Mount Kenya supremacy battles. Well, it appears there's a fresh battle for the control of Mount Kenya politics, and it is taking shape, pitting allies of Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua against those of Kiharu MP Ndindi Nyoro. Now, this supremacy battle comes ahead of Murang'a County yesterday when Nyoro hosted a group of Kenya Kwanza leaders in his constituency. And speaking at the launch, it was a bursary scheme that they were speaking in, that will see all day secondary school students receive about 12,000 in tuition fees. The politician touted Nyoro, those politicians who were there touted Nyoro as the most suitable to succeed President William Ruto. Another interesting development in the mountain. So already we can see, what, just 4 months into office, and this
President
battle is
William
already
Ruto has
beginning?
barely settled in at the
Right.
House on the Hill, so maybe this conversation could be too early,
Right.
or is it
Also very
just
strategic
the
politically?
politicians strategically planning themselves? We'll wait and see.
All right. So, right, let me just wind up on the Daily Nation very quickly. Mystery of woman's death after shooting in the neck. I don't know if, Leila, you followed up on this particular story. I've seen a number of press statements released on the same. This is a woman who collapsed and died in Nairobi city center on Monday evening because she had been shot moments earlier. This is what a post-mortem has revealed. According to the police, Lillian Waithera, who was 46 years of age, worked at the National Hospital Insurance Fund. She collapsed and died. That's along Kaunda Street, just here outside Nation Center. Witnesses and police say that as she was walking around 5 p.m., she started to complain of chest pains. She then collapsed and stopped breathing. Her colleagues who were with her called an ambulance, which arrived quickly, but the respondents declared her dead at the scene. And interestingly, weirdly enough, is that she had been shot and she was not aware of that.
So it's an interesting story because we've been following it in the security circles.
Right.
There is the concern of sniper attacks in the city.
Yeah.
Is this a reality? Is this a possibility? And there is that purported report from the pathologist that say that a bullet was lodged in her lung area. So nobody has really seen the physical document. We are also waiting to see what will come out from that office. Maybe Dr. Johansen Odwor could shed more light into this conversation. NHIF has already released a statement talking about how her death is under mysterious circumstances. But then again, there's so much going on in terms of propaganda, Zain, in terms of communication that has come out, and a counter conversation coming out of fake information from this particular story, whether or not she was a government critical part of an investigation in the NHIF, and whether or not that could have led
So
to her death.
there's a lot of information
There's a lot of questions
surrounding this
this particular death, but in the next few days we'll be able to get more information, and that usually begins with Dr. Johansen Odwor's office.
All right, so we'll certainly be looking forward to see how that pans out. Like I said, okay, so just a final report here. Chitembwe takes fight to job for job to the Supreme Court. That's the embattled High Court Judge Juma Chitembwe, who's now moved to the Supreme Court seeking to block his removal from office of gross misconduct. The judge yesterday filed more than 3,000 pages of appeal at the Apex Court, challenging a tribunal's recommendation for his removal from office. And in the appeal that is packed in 240 volumes, he argues that the allegations leveled against him were not proved to the required standard to warrant his removal. His lawyer, Peter of Wena and Company Advocates, says the judge, who was suspended in May of 2022, wants the tribunal's decision set aside and for him to be allowed to resume duty. This is another developing story. We'll certainly be following up on that.
But then I'm most possibly connected to the next story. Uhuru picked to lead the AU monitoring team ahead of the Nigeria polls. Nigeria, of course, Africa's biggest country in terms of population, is going into an extremely important poll on February 25th, 2023. President Uhuru Kenyatta, again, getting another senior appointment from the African Union. Will this affect his critical appointment in the Ethiopia and DRC
This is his second mission, right?
Yes, this is his second mission under the AU, but also his third appointment in the region, because he is also East Africa Community's lead negotiator in the DRC crisis.
All right. So this will be very interesting, because we're going to have a discussion around this particular matter and this appointment of the former President Uhuru Kenyatta.
And why is East Africa not so excited about the Nigerian election? Do we care about that Nigerian election?
And there's a lot happening in Nigeria.
So much.
Including the new design of the currency.
The new design of the currency, a cash crunch, and there's also no fuel in fuel stations. And for many Nigerians, they feel this is a crisis that needs to be done and dealt with. They're tired.
All right. And we'll have to dissect the dynamics around Nigeria and the elections there. Let me move forward very quickly to the Business Daily. De La Rue, Kenya stoppage triggers a checkbook crisis. Kenyan banks are facing a logistic crisis of supplying customers with checks after dominant banknotes and security printer De La Rue announced plans to freeze local operations from March the 31st. You can read that report there. That's on, if I'll get it right, I think this is pages 4, I think, of the Business Daily. Treasury plan to deal with Kenya's debt crisis by 2026. The National Treasury says the government will need up to 2026 to dispense with huge debt repayments and calibrate Kenya's economy back to a sustainable path. The Controller of Budget says she has received threats from some governors in her quest to ensure prudent management of public finance after they have been released by the Central Bank of Kenya. And also, finally, still on the Business Daily, I&M in permanent waiver of bank to mobile transfer fees. All right, and Taifa Leo, this is what we have on the front page.
Ruto apakulia raia ugali hewa. Taifa Leo is just amazing. I look forward to their headlines because they've become bolder with time. And so he says, japo aliahidi kutilia mkazo uzalishaji wa chakula, serikali yake yapunguza ekari za kilimo cha unyunyiziaji maji, yaondoa lita 50,000 za dawa za kuua wadudu na kupunguza mbegu za viazi, bei ya mlo ikipaa. Critically, basically the Taifa Leo today just talking about the high cost of living and the increasing cost of unga. Should Kenya now move into other food commodities other than just depending on maize meal? Do you think it's time?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like we still have a lot of potential when it comes to what we've been doing so far. But, you know, economic experts are saying, I listened to some and they say that, you know, the president's agenda, especially when it came to that irrigation scheme, Galana Kulalu, would be quite something, a game changer in the industry. So that's something that we hope to see.
It's interesting because in the Kenyan food basket in Trans Nzoia County, I did a story the other day, and majority of the farmers there are now ditching maize for sugarcane. Interesting.
Oh wow. Okay, so that's something we look forward to hearing more about. And finally, Airbus Boeing vie for Uganda orders. I think we had that report yesterday. All right, so we're going to just finish up on that. Let me leave it here at the Business Daily. All right, so we are certainly going to be taking a very short break here on AM Live. But of course, when we do come back, we will be having that much awaited conversation, the 2023 African Union Heads of State Summit, which is currently happening in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, at an especially delicate moment for the continent as the heads of state come together to take stock of the wins and lost opportunities of the meeting and the organization's plans to meet its objective. The past 2 years have seen deadly civil wars in Ethiopia and the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, with armed groups destabilizing the peace. Countries such as Somalia, Mozambique and the Lake Chad Basin continue to battle terrorist insurgencies as an example. But the heads of state also have some recent successes to build on, like the Continental Free Trade Area endorsed by the heads of state back in 2018. All right, so that is what we'll be having a conversation around. Leila, let me just introduce our panelists this morning very quickly before we come back from the break. We do have Professor Noah Midamba, Senior Associate, Global Center for Policy and Strategy. Prof, a very good morning.
Good morning.
Karibu sana. Dr. Fatuma Ali, Associate Professor at the International Relations at the USIU. A very good morning. Karibu sana, Dr. Fatuma. And Professor Migaya Ketch, International Trade and Governance Expert. Very good morning, Prof. Karibu sana. Looking forward to this conversation. So we are going to take a very short break. Leila and I will be back in a short while and we'll continue with this conversation. All right.
Realize that because of you, my son is being accused of very ugly things.
I am sorry, ma'am, but I didn't have anything to do with that. I only came here to speak with Mickey.
Marissa, what are you doing here?
I came over because I was worried.
Okay, come inside then. Let's talk here.
No.
I'm pretty sure your godmother hates me now, am I right?
She'll get over it for sure. Oh, hey, by the way, I told Mickey about what happened. And he said we should go see a doctor just to be careful.
Did you tell Mickey?
It had to be you.
Grow your biashara by accessing loans, investment options, convenient banking, network opportunities, and so much more. Njoo tukujenge. Visit any one of our 93 branches countrywide. Family Bank is regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya.
Buda, kama uko na kakitu, maganji, usikuwe mgamu sana kwa mpenzio. Time to time, mfanyie surprise. Mpeleke salon atengenezwe kanywele hivi, mchukulie kasimu kazuri, peleka yeye dina kwa hoteli kapoa, akaange tu amefurahi. Utajionea mafuriko ya upendo. Right.
To get mafuriko za upendo by Vuma, dial star 812 804#. Skiza na Nation.
Now this is what we call convergence. Come through for the morning fix this and every single Friday right here on NTV. Yes, it's about that time.
You know, the coolest thing about mornings is that a girl and two guys together in the mix, you never know what to expect. You guys are crazy.
From Friday 6, bring your good vibes, bring your picks. From 7 a.m., it's a dope mix. Every single thing on Friday changes with the morning fix.
All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching AM Live on NTV, and just time to get into our conversation this morning. We are focusing on that ongoing AU meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and of course coming at quite a delicate moment in the continent. A number of issues that we need to look into. Just to reintroduce my panelists this morning, if you're just joining us, Professor Noah Midamba, Dr. Fatuma Ali, as well as Professor Migai Akech, to just converse around some of these pertinent issues. Remember, you can engage with us on our social media platforms. The hashtag we're using this morning is AM Live NTV, at NTV Kenya, at Leila Mohammed. Talk to us. What are some of the key issues that perhaps are concerned for you, Leila?
So we begin this conversation from the 42nd ordinary session of the Executive Council that happened on the 15th and the 16th of February. That's just 2 days ago. We are waiting for the 36th summit for the African heads of state on Saturday and Sunday. And let me begin with you, Professor Migai, and the Africa we want, the Agenda 2063, yes, is at the back of the minds of these heads of state, and in this year we're talking about the acceleration of the after implementation. Let's begin there. For Africa to trade as a bloc, for Africa to compete on the international stage, what then do we need to do as an entire continent? Because we have the regional blocks and we have those small issues that some of those blocks have not yet been able to fully ratify the after. How then do we move forward as a continent?
Thank you very much, Leila. So the 36th ordinary session of the AU is going to, it has a long agenda, and the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, is on the agenda at two levels. The first level is, and first of all, some 44 countries, I believe, have now ratified the AfCFTA. It means they are ready to trade under the regime of the AfCFTA. And so what is now happening from the perspective of the Assembly is the topmost organ of the African Union. It is an assembly of the heads of states and government. And basically they take decisions on policies. And they are doing two things with the AfCFTA. One is to adopt a number of protocols that have now been agreed upon, and these are the protocols of the AfCFTA on investment, on competition policy, and intellectual property rights, which completes, if you wish, the second step of the AfCFTA instrument adoption process. So that is one. But number two, the AU has a practice of every time it meets, it adopts a theme for the year. And because of the centrality of trade in Africa's development agenda, if you look at Agenda 2063, which is Africa's or the African Union's development blueprint, it places trade at the center of everything. And so this year, the theme is going to be, or is, acceleration of the AfCFTA. So they're going to adopt that. They're going to have appoint somebody as a champion, typically a former head of state or a current head of state, that will then give, if you wish, oomph to the acceleration of the implementation of the AfCFTA. So that is what is on the agenda, among other things. Obviously, it's going to be adopting many decisions. As you know, Africa has experienced, as you pointed out, many wars, for example. And for about 5 or 6 years now, the African Union has had an initiative that it calls Silencing the Guns. So that initiative continues to be on the agenda of the AfCFTA, of the African Union. And then there is, since about 2017, when it's appointed a committee that was led by the current president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. It is going to be discussing the implementation of the Kagame report. So institutional reforms is also on the agenda of the AU heads of state and senate. Yes.
Dr. Fatma, for people to be able to trade, movement is critical in Africa, and in Africa we're still grappling with the question of passport and visa requirements. Some regional blocs like the EAC have totally abolished the question of travel with passports. There is the question of a free visa travel Africa. Do we see ourselves getting there in the next 10 to 15 years?
I think that's one of the challenge of what Professor here said, you know, about making this free movement work. So there's an understanding that people want to move goods, but they don't want to move people. So how will people move? How will the goods move without the people? So I think also there is a bit of coming up with an understanding. And I guess also in some countries, it's not all the African countries, I think some countries also do not want people, but they prefer only the goods to come. I guess it could be issues of security, issues of migration. Remember that we also have the biggest migration is also within our continent itself. So issues of people looking for greener pastures, issues of trafficking. So I think also some countries are a bit conscious of letting others come in, and I think also this is some of the things that they need to iron out if they really want to have a very successful movement, successful trading in terms of countries trading with each other, because there's no way that goods will move without people, because it's actually the people who move. And the other thing was there's a lot of advantage of moving people, because so you move labor, you move relations, and also you move development, because there's need for a lot of human resource. So some countries really have a lot of capacity, and if that also moves around, that also will be key in terms of developing this continent. So I think there should be an idea of thinking beyond just trading in terms of moving goods, but also thinking also how the human resource can also be an
So it's all interlinked.
Aspect. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Prof, is this our magic bullet, you know, to deepen the Africa economic integration when we're talking about after?
Sainabu, my colleagues here both clearly put the ball on the head. It's not going to happen. Our desire for Africa is not going to happen unless each one of us reach out to our hearts and our mind and commit to it and say we are going to do it. Sign up. Europe is trading with each other at 70%. Open free market from Italy to Zurich to everywhere. 70%. Asia is trading with each other at 50%, and in some cases more. Africa is 15%. And you know, we can talk and talk, but talking is cheap, funny. We need to be serious about our governance. We need to be serious about the goals that we set combined as Africa. And what I'm talking about is the excellent example. Lee Kuan Yew, as you know, who was passed away, but he wrote a very interesting letter. I think he's probably the former head of state who has ever written a letter to be read after he died. And what he said, he had two choices when he became the head of state. One, to become the richest man in the world and be listed on Forbes magazine, or to lift his country and his people and be listed as a top 10 economy in the world. And he chose the latter. And so we cannot just gather in Addis and Lagos and elsewhere and have this fantastic vision that we are not committed fundamentally, nation state by nation state, combine Africa to begin to address that. So this need to be articulated in our growth development strategies in Kenya. Combine Africa, combine ourselves, and say we are going to have a free trade, you know, open air, free movement of people, not have the product and drivers stuck with trucks, miles going to from Kenya to Uganda.
So this would be quite, you know, a difficult reality to achieve, because of every individual member state of the AU has their own, you know, governing laws and all policies. So if they do not match up to, you know, the policies that we have in place in terms of ensuring this is implemented, that will be a challenge.
My point is maybe not simple, but I call it simple. Jamal Abdel Nasser, Nkrumah, and everybody wanted United States of Africa. Okay, let's unite first and then talk. Nyerere say, let's start region by region. Let's unite the region, let's mold, and then later on we can come together. I'm one of those people who resonate toward what Nyerere said. We're about to do it in East Africa. This is the biggest thing and the most forward-looking movement that you can have in Africa. I served at the Inter-University Council of East Africa for a long time. The point is, we agree to education is priority for Africa. Education is priority for any country. And yet, some countries are not paying their dues, but they are expecting benefits. If US give us benefits, they say, where's mine? But they have not paid their dues to belong to that union. And then they want to be leaders in that union. And this is happening in every organ, every structure that we have in Africa. We have to be serious about ourselves. We have to be serious about the future of this country if we want to make a difference.
Professor Migai, for many of those who will benefit from the After Dream is the business persons, the private sector. How critical is it for the governments now to look into the private sector space to enable business to grow inside the critical players, the individual countries, the regional blocks, and then Africa as a whole?
Thank you, Leila. What needs to happen at the national level in terms of the African Continental Free Trade Area, or the FCFTA as I like to call it, is for governments of the states that have ratified the treaty to implement it. It's that simple. And so far, the approach that has been taken is to ask these states to come up with what is called a national implementation strategy. So the national implementation strategy tells you what is it that needs to be done at the national level for businesses to be able to trade on a day-to-day basis under the FCFTA regime. And the implementation entails many things. It entails establishing the right institutional framework. If you look at the Kenya's national FCFTA implementation strategy, for example, so we have a strategy at the national level in Kenya. It says, let us set up an institution to coordinate the implementation of the FCFTA. And that institution will consist of actors from government and actors from the private sector. Private sector including business, but they're not leaving out civil society as well, because the ordinary citizen also is an important stakeholder in this arrangement. Number two, it requires us to have or establish a new set of laws and regulations. So for example, you'll realize that trade creates winners and losers. So one country, in terms of exports, for example, you'll find that one country is going to be benefiting more than the other country. And so it becomes necessary to institute what are called safeguards. But you need to have a proper institutional framework for doing it and a fair way of doing it, so that you're able to convince your trading partners that yes, because of trade there is some imbalance, you're benefiting more than we are doing. How do we correct that? Because if we don't correct it, then there's going to be challenges in terms of persuading local constituencies that the regime is good for us. Because at the end of the day, you know, you have to remember that trade is politics. So how do you persuade local constituencies that the initiative is a good one? Because I mean, the governments of the day want to do that which they're elected in office to do. So if they're not giving the people what they're elected in office to do, for example, creating better trading conditions, then the people will vote them out. So you get protectionism as a result. But you see, you want to dissuade your trading partners from erecting trading barriers. And so these are conversations that require that you establish very, very good institutions and fair ones that enable you to resolve those kinds of inter-country disputes as they arise.
Is that why the question of the hard currency, the challenges around it, and the dream of having a one currency Africa, beginning with the regional blocks, will be a pipe dream for the time being?
Yes, it is, but I think that is a long way off from now. You have to look to realize that regional integration is a process. You start small, and then ultimately you end up with a political union, the original dream of the founders of the Organization of African Unity that became the AU. Right. And in our context, you have to go back to what is called the Abuja Treaty, that was to establish the African Economic Community. So regional integration is a process. You start off from a very small. If you remember, we used to call ourselves a preferential trade area. Then we said we moved to a free trade area. Then we can move to an economic union. Then we can move to a monetary union. Then we can move to a political union. So it's a process that takes a very long time. If you've seen, for example, the best illustration of regional integration is a European Union. It started as a cold union in the 40s, 50s, but now it has become a monetary union. It's a long
even
process.
There, the United Kingdom remained loyal to the sterling pound.
Yes, but you remember the UK withdrew from.
Even before the withdrawal,
yes, but
they kept the pound in the United Kingdom.
Yes, and you have to look at it from different perspectives. And sovereignty, you know, just the national pride as well of having your national currency is part of it. Obviously, there are other economic considerations, but the point is we are very far off from even talking of a monetary union. Look at it this way: the most successful of the of the African regional economic communities, or the RECs as they're called, is the East African community. But the East African community now is what are we? We are a common market now. We are a common market, which means now we have a common external tariff. Yeah. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a step below. It is a free trade area. Yes. What we are saying is, let us reduce and ultimately eliminate tariffs. Yes. We are not even talking of adopting an external common or external common tariffs at the level of the continental arrangement. So it's a long journey, in other words.
Dr. Fatma, before we move away from the business angle, let's talk about what will affect business in Africa, and conflict is at the heart of it. We have two tiers of conflict. We have countries that are affected by terrorism and civil strife in the eastern part of Africa, and we also have a very unstable West Africa, which is dogged by coups and whatnots. Looking at some of these challenges which are ready and alive, for example, the eastern part of DRC, the northern side of of Ethiopia in the Tigray region. Somalia is also struggling with the terrorism aspect. How then does Africa move towards enabling the guns to silence forever and for peace to prevail, for business to thrive?
Well, thank you, Leila. I think that's a very critical question. I think it's interesting. Right now, it's one of the biggest agenda of the African Union. And not only that, but I think now there will be change of chairmanship in the Union from Senegal to a very small island in the Indian Ocean, Comoros, which has very limited diplomatic and political weight. So I think the African Union has to undergo a lot of things like institutional capacity, sometimes also be proactive, you know, in terms of diplomacy. Like right now, the issue of DRC, you know, does not need waiting or side chat. It needs immediate attention because it's a very concerning issue. This could lead to an interstate, it's already an interstate tension, but it also could lead to an internationalized conflict because, you know, this involves many other countries and there could be a spillover considering that CAR is just next there with its own issues of transition. And I think one of the ways of dealing with issues of conflict is also when African leaders, as Professor said, can genuinely come together, sit down and try to see ways of how they can do it. So for example, I know that's going to be a big challenge for the Comoros president, Azali Osmani, to really, you know, deal with all these issues. But I'm sure there are other leaders like South Africa and the rest. So there is need for that proactive process. The other thing also, I think sometimes as the other problem of African security issues is that everybody's involved. So for example, you have the AU Commission chair who is from Chad, and then also issues of Chad affects him directly. So I think also a way of distancing from these issues and tackling it as a continent, but in the long term. And I think also and the other thing also really sticking in terms of what is the rules, you know, like not really bending, you know, like the issue of Chad, when the African Union, instead of following the LOM declaration of saying if any country has a change of state, no, unconstitutionally, then they're kicked out of the union to kind of like send a message that this cannot be tolerated. You know, it was given a grace moment, you know, the junta that came in led by the son of the president who was removed through the coup. So that also does not show a very good image in terms of really handling those situations, because it doesn't give a strong message like you can really deal with this situation. And I think that they were able to rectify with now the other coups of Sudan, Burkina Faso, but it's not enough. And the other thing also, I think African Union also has to learn how to work with other organizations. Like in the case of Libya, right now, UN has taken the lead, you know, having a special representative, but they also have to come in and own that process. I think the other thing also is that lack of ownership in dealing with security, peace, and humanitarian issues. And that's why also you have a lot of issues in terms of self-sustaining operations of the African Union in terms of finance. Right now, one of the biggest financiers of the African Union activity is the EU. EU is going to the Europe because now they have their own problem with the Ukraine-Russia war, so they're going to focus more on there. So the African economy will feel like an orphan because they have no one to support. So I think also there is a lot of mechanism that has to be put in, and this is all about goodwill, commitment, and of course having a long-term picture, like the long-term goal, because I think most of these issues are more of reactionary than being proactive, like starting early enough. And right now there are a lot of issues to deal with, and if they are not taken into account, not only will it hamper trade between states, but it might also bring down some countries. Like some countries will be dragged with those conflicts. Like I mean, I see as Congo as a hurricane in this region, you know, DRC, and taking East Africa down with it, because these are the same members of the East African community.
It's interesting you talk about the DRC, because at the moment the Common Union has declared that it's going to fund the East African Regional Force for as long as it can. So individual countries are pumping in an amount of money into that. They're looking into the EU to aid in terms of facilitating the military incursion there to last longer than the 6 months. But we're also doing a diplomatic mission there. President Uhuru Kenyatta leading the charge there. However, there is the question of whether we should merge the Luanda process, which is under the Great Lakes region, with the EAC, the Nairobi process. We are expecting a Nairobi 4. It was supposed to be inside the Congo itself, but the situation there is as fluid as it can come. How then do we mix the military vis-a-vis the diplomacy to enable Africa deal with its own internal problems?
Yeah, so I think also one has to come before the other. So diplomacy has to start. There are certain things that can really work. In this case, you know, if you look at the situation of Rwanda and DRC, there are certain leaders who have ears of those leaders, you know, that they can be spoken to be more open to negotiation in case of like our former president Uhuru has access to both leaders, you know, to both Kinshasa and Kigali, and this could start. I think also normally we've always waited until when armed conflict has become violent, and then now we bring the peace enforcement. But I think if we start from the preventive measures where we actually use public and private diplomacy, that could actually help. And you know, that could also ease the tension, because of course there are ways that some countries could be informed of how war maybe is not, how do you say, is not the option, not only for their nation but also regionally. It has a cost, and also certain ways could be worked out, a new mechanism in terms of coexistence, you know, and finding opportunities of working together and dealing with the questions, and of course making commitment. Like in this case also, I think before even sending the military, and you know what happened when you say the military, they'll say we don't want the Rwandese here because, you know, they're coming to see, yes, and then they'll say we don't want Kenyans, we don't want this. So instead of like getting to that, I think diplomacy will really work. I think it's a bit also cheaper when you can actually get the right people to do the shuttling between the two conflicting parties. And in this case, for me, I totally believe that diplomacy will really be beneficial for the Great Lake regions, when we have leaders who can actually go to Kagame and say, you know, or Kigali, do not support the M23 because this also has a consequence. Then they will support the FDLRM, yes, and this is also an understanding. So you know that if I do this, this will be the consequence, because I think when people are involved in this situation, they don't see. So for me, I think diplomacy is one of the cheap way of dealing with conflict, and then now we can have the peace enforcement through the forces in terms of now bringing the tension down and disarming, and of course now clearing most of the violence that is caused by this situation. So it has to be, one has to come way before, and then the other has to follow. And I think also the other thing also, the African Union has to really invest in working with their regional organizations. So right now it really has to work with East African community, hold his hand, and don't just let things for East African community to handle it, you know, because it's the parent, right? So you cannot let your kids fight around. So I think that will also be helpful, because when this regions cannot see eye to eye, they are able to help them identify some of this problem. Yeah.
Professor Midemo, let's move to another region of Africa that's quite critical, West Africa. The biggest economy there, the biggest country in terms of the population, is going into a critical election in February 25th. President Uhuru Kenyatta has been given a new appointment. The African Union is taking there a 90-man team. to look into the Nigerian election. It is the tail end of President Muhammadu Buhari's term in office. There's been the question of SARS, how he's used the police to deal with civilians, the question of lack of petrol in the country, and then the all-elusive Naira. And there's a new note running around the streets of Lagos, Abuja, and many other states that many people are saying they are new, but we're not finding them anywhere.
And also, just to add, I mean, in terms of the security situation there, you have the Boko Haram insurgency still being a huge challenge in Nigeria. How do you think that, you know, works within the dynamics, the political dynamics in Nigeria?
Wow. Do we have a day?
I think we should set a day aside for that.
Yeah. It is huge, and it is unfortunate for Africa, and I would say unfortunate for humanity, what is going on in Nigeria. Nigeria is the largest economy in the continent of Africa. Nigeria is the largest producer of oil in Africa, and to have a situation where ordinary people don't have food, where people are being kidnapped. My friend returned from America to establish his family back in Nigeria. He's a professor, and they build a home, and the next thing he knows, they kidnapped his brother. So he packed, and his family, they went back to America, not in Nigeria. They're Nigerians, friends of mine, who have now come to Kenya and asked, we give us a piece of land. We want to settle here. They're settling in Kenya. Now, Africa cannot just give up. There are two things that is happening. One is inept political leadership, which is all over Africa and responsible for a number of our woes and why we're not moving ahead. The next thing is level of corruption. If you look at country by country, compare in Africa, we're one of the most corrupt countries, a continent in the world. And Asia was able, particularly Lee Kuan Yew, was able to ruthlessly deal with corruption by targeting his own family, by being an example to the whole country and the whole world. So every major business departments of universities in the world are talking about Lee Kuan Yew as an example, including Harvard University. And we know that there are a lot of Nigerians who are highly educated. They're in America, they're in Europe, they're everywhere else. These people collectively can turn Nigeria around to what it needs to be. Thirdly, the third point, which I'm very pleased about, President Uhuru really, particularly towards the last part of his regime, proved to be a leader, not only of Kenya, but a leader of Africa. And he was widely accepted as a leader. He brought literally the DRC Congo into the African community fold. And the role that he played, that Fatma talked about, he can talk to Kagame, he can talk to Museveni, he can talk to everybody because he has a personal, soft leadership style, which resonates with diplomats, and very quickly. And I made a statement just before his last regime and President Ruto were coming, that the best thing President Ruto will do is let Uhuru continue with this role, what he was playing, both in Somalia, in Ethiopia, and also in DRC Congo. So African Union has done the right thing, the kind of role that Obasanjo is playing. President Kenyatta has now joined in that regime, and we need it badly in Africa. because our elections and transitions to those elections are not something that you're looking forward to. You can now look at the issue we are having in Kenya. So Nigeria has had its own share from the beginning. On the other hand, Nigeria has moved in very strongly to be a leader of West Africa militarily. It has intervened in many situations that hopefully can bring the West Africa together, like we are doing in East Africa. But people have to look at the internal dynamic of Nigeria. People have to look at the transition, the current regime to the next regime. How well are they going to do it? I was with Goodluck Jonathan last year. I was a keynote speaker in one of the university graduation, and we spent a lot of time, he and I, we spent a lot of time talking. And when you listen to Goodluck Jonathan, when you listen to other retired presidents of Africa, they're saying the same thing. We could do it better. We have done A, B, and C. We can change. And so political ineptness and corruption, level corruption, is our biggest enemy together. That create the wolves that we have in Africa, and therefore we cannot manage, we cannot focus. You know, each department cannot focus like they've done in Singapore, so that they will produce goods and service for the people. So we're looking at, hopefully President Uhuru and the team will do a good job to bring in the new team for Nigeria. A number of people who are running are fairly competent people with a lot of experience. We want Nigeria to be a leader in West Africa, so that we have South Africa, southern part of Africa, the East Africa, the West Africa, and the North Africa, and then we can talk about the Union of Africa.
May I comment on that?
Sure.
I think Africa has improved tremendously in terms of governance and security. If you're talking about the institutions that the African Union has established since its inception. So, and I like to be I'm not an optimist, and I am talking from my experience as a governance expert with the African Peer Review Mechanism, where I worked for 3 years.
Right.
And I want to look at it at two levels. In terms of progressing Africa, the AU's approach has been twofold. It is to say, what are the structural governance challenges that we face, and what are the crises that arise from time to time, and how do we deal with them? And so the African Union established a twin approach. One, a twin approach in terms of the frameworks for dealing with governance and for dealing with peace and security challenges, some of which arise because of governance challenges, like elections, rigged elections, for example.
Transition facility.
Yes. So what they said is, on the governance side, starting with the NEPAD declaration of 2002, recall when Becky and Abdoulaye Wade spearheaded the so-called African Renaissance.
Right.
They said, let us have this new agenda for Africa's development. So to speak, to say, we want to govern ourselves better, and that way we can attract development. So governance has been at the center of the African Union reinvention, if you wish. And so they set up this mechanism called the African Peer Review Mechanism. And it's a mechanism for assessing governance in participating states. It's a voluntary mechanism. So a country, Kenya has had, I think, 3 initiatives. Country review missions and a targeted review mission. Targeted just dealing with specific issues, but we've had 2 broad missions that are looking at our governance, and many countries are now following suit. The whole idea is to be able to tell a country, look at yourself, this is how you govern yourselves, and the member states are then the heads of the states are then peer reviewed by their peers, by fellow presidents, and telling them, so and so you're messing up, you're killing your people, you're rigging elections, you're doing this, the other, stop. If it is a candid conversation, as was envisaged, Africa will be better. The challenge is that,
considering what we are seeing even in the region.
Yes, but that is the challenge. That is the challenge, and it's about politics. And for me, institutionally, we have the right mechanisms. The challenge in Africa, as I see it, is that the ordinary citizen on the ground is not aware of these institutions. So the same way that we demand good governance at the national level, we must demand good governance at the continental level. We must demand accountability of these mechanisms. So they exist. So that is number one. Number two is the African peace and security architecture. This deals with security crisis, and this happened as a result of the Rwanda genocide. When the AU was feeling, we need to establish a mechanism so that we don't have a similar situation developing, and that is how the Peace and Security Council was created, which is a very, very important mechanism for dealing with crisis and security challenges on the continent. And it's established a very important mechanism that is called the Continental Early Warning System, or QEWS. If you go to the AU headquarters, you'll find at QEWS you'll find a room full of screens. They're just monitoring what's happening on Africa on a day-to-day basis, and they have agents at the local level. They collect data using technology, for example, using the mobile phone. So they know what is happening on the continent on a day-to-day basis. The challenge is dealing with them politically. And why is that happening? That is happening because we have hamstrung the African Union. How have we hamstrung the African Union? The African Union is an intergovernmental organization. It is not a supranational organization. It means we give very, very little power to the African Union. And decision making there is by consensus primarily. And so if you cannot find consensus, you cannot move.
So then what happens to Agenda 2063?
The Africa we want.
Where does that leave us?
It is. Agenda 2063 is a blueprint. It is a dream that you cannot realize if you do not resolve these governance challenges.
So it falls back to individual member states within
it falls
Africa.
It falls to empowering.
Right.
We need to empower the African Union.
Okay.
What we have is a situation, and it gets worse. It gets worse because you have a situation in which, so the African Union moved from saying, we really don't care about what is happening. We cannot interfere in the affairs of member states. That was the philosophy of the OAU. And then the AU comes in and says, in light particularly of Rwanda, for example, they say we cannot have a policy of indifference. So we're going to adopt a policy of non-indifference. However, recall that we have regional economic communities.
Yes.
What is their philosophy? Their approach is non-interference. So what happens when one organization, the continental organization, is saying we have a philosophy of non-indifference, and the regional economic community say we are not interfering? Then that is what happens when you have these challenges, and then there are geopolitical considerations for example, in the Great Lakes region. So there is no trust. It means the AU institutions and the regional economic communities cannot work well together. They have an MOU for dealing with crisis, by which they've said we'll adopt a policy of subsidiarity, saying let the regional economic communities handle crisis in their region. Or let us intervene when they are not able to. It doesn't always work in practice, but what I'm trying to say is we have the architecture, the correct architecture for dealing with governance issues on the continent and dealing with security crisis on the continent. The question is, how can we make these two architectures more effective? And that is part of the conversation when you're talking about institutional reforms in the AU.
Dr. Fatma, before we delve into going further into administration, there's also another issue around Africa in terms of economies that were previously thriving. For example, South Africa is dealing with a serious power crisis. The administration there actually appointed a minister for power. It's that bad. And for many African countries, for them to do industrialization, they need power to sustain themselves. The African Union, how then does it look at a country like South Africa that is struggling with a very critical part of its economy to pull itself out of such a rut?
Yeah. So to just add to what Professor was saying here, I think also their geopolitical interest sometimes also that can be within the continent and beyond the continent. So that power issue is not only in South Africa, and you can see now South Africa importing water from its neighbors, but you have another tension that is between Ethiopia and Egypt, and this is because of the Nile, and I think also this might also happen to other riparian. So that's why also apart from that also is how I talked about the ownership. So how the African Union, with all the structures that they have, they step in, and of course now how do you keep some other interest away, because some of these interests also have their own interest inside. So you see parallel processes to the African Union as well. Now with this, I think also it's an issue of really coming up and having very good agreement between riparian states or countries that are trading in those areas that is beneficial for both. So I think for a long time, this kind of agreement or process have not been seen to benefiting everyone. I'll just want to give you the example of Ethiopia and Egypt. From the time that Ethiopia started building its own dam, the GAD, so there was the idea that it's going to pull all the water, and so it's already doing that.
and for Egypt,
and
producing is God-given.
Exactly, and producing the electricity, and then also the dream of making the whole southern island of Ethiopia fertile and green, and then they become the food basket of this continent. But I think also that should also make sense to the Egyptians and say, if we produce food, we are going to give you that food in a cheaper price. You understand? There should be something in. I think Professor did mention that there should be a win-win situation, and that's why also I think all this fear and the tension can go down. So there should be a way that Ethiopia can say, okay, we are going to use this water to make our country become the food basket, which means from our food basket you will have access to this, and it will be cheaper for you. Even if you think that you will not get the water, you will get something in return. And I think also that is where now there is this idea of critical thinking and innovation in terms of how country can benefit. And I think also this is one of the things that we need in our continent, because we have a lot of challenges. Climate change is there. Droughts will always be a factor, and it might lead to many other things, like also displacing people, displacing economies, and of course even what you've talked about, the thing that there's issues with power in South Africa. That is not because of climate change. There is no water. So how do we now share? How do we work around that? The countries who have, you know, how do they make that available to the rest? But it's also a situation where countries also gain from one another. Now in the example of Ethiopia and Egypt, I think also Sudan can gain, because, you know, Sudan also has, you know, this conflict tension is Egypt, Sudan, and then Ethiopia. And not only that, but it could get to a point that Ethiopia is supplying electricity to all African countries if they're able to really realize the ambition of what they're doing. So I think also it's just knowing and saying that, and of course when there are also these other countries that come in to help us negotiate or help us deal with our conflict, they are also conscious that these are resources that are in this continent, that is not only to take them out and gain the dollar, but also is to help the continent. So because now you'll have a parallel process to the AU, Saudi Arabia, what's it called? United Emirates, United Arab Emirates also involved in negotiating. So they will not understand really what is the continent's interest. And this is also goes back to the blueprint that the continent creates, like NEPAD and all that. Yeah. So for me, I think also there is need to think of how these resources can be shared, and that's why there will be so many others, you know, the maritime border issues,
right.
So, but just to say how we are going to benefit as countries, because these are resources that are already within our territory, so they're here for a reason, and how do we come up with a situation that is not only beneficial to you, but beneficial to the whole continent and to everyone. And whoever is supporting the process, also they can chip in and see how it can be. And I think also the other thing was, if there is a lot of like state-to-state cooperation, not only bilateral but also multilateral. In this sense, it can help.
All right, all right, and we'll come back to you, Prof. Noah, in just a moment. But we have to take this break very quickly. Well, you can continue engaging. I see a couple of tweets here. We'll be coming back to take a look at some of those in a moment. The hashtag we use in a moment. All right, thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching M Live here on NTV. Interesting conversation as we take a look at, you know, just focus on Africa. What is the state of the continent right now on the backdrop of that summit, the AU summit that is happening in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia? And Leila, just before you ask a question, I know we're getting to Professor Noah Midaba. Very interesting comment here. Someone was saying, and I picked it from our Facebook page, they're saying that the AU influence globally should be growing by now, and we should be having discussions on how we can have full membership in the G20. So this is quite interesting. So, you know, people are quite, you know, optimistic, positive outlook on where the AU stands right now.
I think the most biggest personalities we see in the G20 is South Africa, and I think it's high time from the conversations that we've been having here, and Professor Aket, you are very optimistic that One Africa will happen. There is huge potential in Africa, but then again, Africa is grappling with a lot of challenges, not only infrastructure, but including health-wise.
I mean, we have health issues. We're just out of COVID-19.
Uganda has been grappling with the Ebola virus.
Yes.
We are seeing other African countries having their own challenges with small but critical ailments like malaria. HIV, AIDS is also big in Africa. During this summit, we are expecting a CDC report and an African Medicines Agency report, AMA. How then is health critical for Africa in terms of a healthy continent, a healthy people, and a healthy trade environment?
Thank you, Leila. It's a very big question. What you need to think about from a global standpoint is everything we're doing is about people, and it's around people. You know, United States, Abraham Lincoln said, government of the people, for the people, and by the people. The issue then, if you don't have healthy citizens, then you don't have production, and you don't have the goodwill. And so we cannot ignore this little person in the village who is selling potato to the big businessman in Nairobi. They are citizens of the country of Kenya. Now, let's dig into this subject a little bit in terms of African capacity. DRC Congo alone, if you talk the mineral resource deposit in DRC Congo, is worth $25 trillion. The biggest economy in the world is United States, $25 trillion. The second biggest economy in the world is China, $17 trillion. And then Russia, that has a lot of warheads, nuclear warhead, has only $2 trillion. Germany economy is bigger than Russia. The state of Texas is twice as big as Russia economy. Now, Russia is coming in, Africa is looking at Russia for help. And one country in Africa has a potential to feed the entire continent of Africa, and that's DRC Congo. If you look at the fertile land, the the whole country in terms of food production, and then you get into southern Sudan, a huge country with a huge potential. The East Africa, we have plenty of water, rain that comes, all the time, and then we have a problem with not retaining one bits of rain that come. Israel, it rains once a year, just a drop. They keep every water, and they continue conserving, and we don't do that. So the point is, we need to be serious about looking at each other. When President Ruto came on board, one of the goals that I really like, and I hope he really turn around and focus on that, is agriculture. Agriculture, food security is fundamental to everything we do in Kenya and in Africa. The lands that are arid, like in Turkana, but we can turn Turkana out. You talk about Galana irrigation. We can turn Turkana exactly the way Israel has done it in the desert in the Middle East. Agriculture. In Kabondo, which is in our area where we come from, people grow potatoes, but they're sitting along the road with a basket of potato, and the point is, at the end, this potato will rot.
Because they don't have a market.
Because they don't have a market. Now, so the infrastructure that we develop, that Uhuru and Kibaki worked very hard on, is critical to ferry that food from Kabondo to Turkana, so that those people can have food. They can have fresh fish, they can have food basket, and nobody will be going hungry the way they are. And then we open up Somalia border, such that, Al-Shabaab is recruiting more people because of poverty and all other issues that are involved. So that we trade, open trade and movement, free movement of goods and services, which we are now starting very well in East Africa. And so let's be serious. If I was president, each one of the heads of department will have regional, continental, and national KPR to meet every year. And they will be judged on that. And therefore, we need to infuse that so that African Union begin to mean something. But realistically, where I come from, is we have to develop East Africa first. And then Southern Africa need to take care of Southern Africa. If you remember, by the time Nelson Mandela became president, South Africa was an industrialized country, isn't it?
Yeah.
With everything. They can produce buses for us, they can do whatever. And few years after that, there is power blackout. There is insecurity everywhere. I travel a lot in South Africa. And we can do that. But the issue, we cannot just look at each other and criticize each other and say we're a basket case. There is hope, like our friend here said, there is hope. And what, if you go back to Barack Obama presidency, one of his most frustration was he had a plan to select about 4 countries in Africa and make them the best example for the rest to follow. But he couldn't, because Africans didn't have agenda. Everybody else have personal something, my country, my country. And there was no agenda that cut across the board like AU is trying to do now. We say, here are our priority, and here's where we need our help. Lastly, the point that I want to say is Africa need to look at itself like a family need to look at itself. We need to take care of Africa. We cannot look at Europe, we cannot look at America, we cannot look at Asia to take care of us. They have their issues, and they particular right now Europe. Okay, Europe now focus on Ukraine
and Russia.
And Russia. Okay, Europe is in trouble. How far is Europe going to go to support our problem in Somali, DRC, to West Africa, Boko Haram? How far? So we can take care of the issue of DRC Congo by getting together, bringing Paul Kagame, bring the president of Congo, bring the president of Uganda together, and said, we are not only going to trade and work with each other. So this resource in Congo, this $24 trillion worth of resource, we can all work around it. We can all bring our technicians. We can all extract it, and we can sell it ourselves to the rest of the world. So instead of waiting for the Wagner Group to come in and have total control.
Do you think it's high time Africa begins looking at issues around creating its own mechanisms to have medicines made here in Africa? And speaking of the Wagner Group, there's also the foreign fighter influence inside Africa. Is that a concern for you?
You know, medicine is almost basic kind of thing. And if you look at Southeast Asia, from Singapore to South Korea to one of the issues they address is medicine. Yes, we can manufacture our own medicine. We have enough scientists who have played major part and in the development, whether it was COVID or other medicine that are being sold in the world today. Now, give you an example. If you go to Israel, all the research facilities are tied to the universities in Israel. They are on campus in Israel. In Africa, they're not on campus. They're somewhere else.
They are government-funded agencies.
They're government funding agencies. And the universities stand out there saying we're doing research. And they don't have the funding to do that research. So we need the government policy which said, if PAFSA, you are going to come here to manufacture your medicine, you must establish it at University of Nairobi campus. We'll give you the land, we'll give you the facility, but you must work from there. The idea is for our people to be able to acquire the techniques and be able to do it for ourselves.
Professor Akech, for Africa to trade peacefully, united, and to grow on the global stage, there are two issues: the customs union, the common market, and a very rugged infrastructure. Some countries are ahead of others, and in some countries, for example, inside the DRC, we don't even have road infrastructure. How do we move?
How we move is by planning and good governance. You cannot trade if you're not properly governed. But like I said, I am an optimist about this. I think if you look at the progress that we've made as a continent the last 2 or so decades, it's been tremendous, and the future is very promising. And I'll give you a number of examples. But particularly, what encourages me is the governance agenda, the African Union's governance agenda. Of course, there are challenges, but there is a platform that if we invest more in it as citizens of Africa, will ensure that our countries are better governed. The APRM, what the APRM does, if we are truly faithful to it, is very, very critical to succeeding, even in terms of trade, whether you're talking about developing the right infrastructure, whether you're talking about the movement of people, whether you're talking about freeing the airspace, whether you're talking about a liberalized services market, name it. But it begins with us taking a look critically and saying, how are we governed? If you look at what the APRM does, in terms of the governance assessments, the way that a country is governed economically is very critical. So what the APRM does is sets through a questionnaire. We say these are the indicators of governance that we want to measure. These are the parameters. This is how we want to compare ourselves even to our neighbors, and so that there is also peer learning. What is it that Kenya is doing that South Africa, for example, can learn? How do we bring Kenya and South Africa together so that they learn from each other? So that is very, very critical. The other one has to do with this so-called African peace and security architecture. The challenge that remains is bringing them together, bringing these architectures closer together. Because from my perspective, I think the AU has empowered the Peace and Security Council more than it has empowered the AGA, the African Governance Architecture. If you look at the two, the Peace and Security Council is empowered by a protocol of the treaty, of the Constitutive Act of the African Union. However, the AGA is an informal platform. It means you can make peace and security decisions, critical ones, but when it comes to governance, we have conversations. The African Governance Architecture platform brings together all the institutions of the African Union that deal with governance. The African Peer Review Mechanism, the African Court on Human People's Rights, the Bureau on Corruption, the Pan-African Parliament, the Economic and Social Council, those kinds of bodies. But they just talk. Hopefully, what they say in terms of, oh, this is what we are seeing in the various countries, percolates, gets through to the African Union Summit so that it can make decisions. Another very critical instrument, and this now relates to the Nigeria elections, is the so-called African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, ACDEG. ACDEG is the charter that we use to establish the extent to which we are having credible elections, the extent to which we are governed democratically. So, for example, when the former President Uhuru Kenyatta is leading the observer mission, the election observer mission to Nigeria, he's working under the auspices of ACDEG. They're going to produce a report, and what is encouraging since Zambia a few years back is that after the elections...
All right, Prof, I apologize. I'm just going to cut you short there for a moment. We have to fix your microphone. It has a bit of an issue, so sorry to cut you short, but we'll be coming back to it so that I can be able to finish that point. You wanted to add something? Because I was going to get to Dr. Fatuma. Yes, because we're almost winding up. I just want to get your final remarks, Dr. Fatuma, on this issue, and looking at what Prof had mentioned earlier was with the institutional reforms that we have to undertake within the African Union to be able for it to perform to its most effective functioning. I mean, when we're looking at that and to be able for it to perform its mission to its best capacity as the African continent, what will you be looking at that meeting that is ongoing in Addis Ababa and some of the key takeaways for you?
All right, so I think one will be the reflection that the head of states will make in terms of 2013. They came up with this flagship, which is the Vision 2063. They've done 10 years, what has worked, what can be done, and of course they went through reforms, institutional reforms and restructuring of the African Union. Is that helpful? Does something else needs to be done? Because there's been a lot of critique of that process, and how is that process may be helpful just to strengthen the internal capacity. And I think another organ that maybe could be very useful for them to invest in at this moment will be the panel of the eminent leaders, because we are seeing fruits of that. So thanks to that panel that Ethiopia was able to end its fighting, you know.
Panel of the wise.
Yeah, panel of the wise, exactly, of the eminent people, men and women. So they also have to make it gender and include more women. It's not only wise men in this continent, they're also wise women.
Eminent people.
Yes, eminent people. Yes. So I think this is also, they really need to invest in that and bring all these leaders who have sat in those positions, who are not able maybe to do things while they were there, but now since they're out of those positions, they're able to do. And I think also we are seeing that this is a good model or formula in terms of having our own leaders brokering peace, using certain leaders who are respected in the continent, who understand these issues, and they can make good headways in terms of bringing together. So I think that will be something to really take home. And I think also really dealing with the matters immediately, you know, like without waiting. I know there will be a lot of side discussions about DRC, about Central Republic of Africa, about Chad, about the transition in Sudan, about Libya, but also apart from the discussion, more or less roadmaps in terms of what can be done. So these are all transitional issues. DRC, there's an election that has to be done. Okay,
it's coming up. And
it's coming up. Exactly, it's coming up. So how do you deal with that? And then also we had the issue of CAR, where the president wants to change his term and make another term. Now, how do you do that? Then you have an issue in Libya. So it's about, again, the governance, the elections, and monitoring those elections. And also, I think one critical issue now in terms of democracy in this continent, I think Nigeria is having a test to its democracy. So, for example, strengthening internal processes, like political parties, they have responsibility when they bring this disciplinary committee. For example, in Nigeria now there's been a lot of hate speech, and nothing has been done. So, for example, the AU can call upon the system in place, like in Nigeria will be the Independent National Election Commission, to kind of force these political parties to ease the tension within them and within internal process. So I think also it should be bottom up, from inside to top, because from top to down is not going to work, because it's too much to chew for an organization.
Correct. All right, and so I'll get back to Professor Migai. We just have about 1 minute, so I'll give you an opportunity, then we'll finish up with Professor Midamba. Key issues that we'll sadly be keen on and will be part of your focus in this meeting.
I think it is just looking to, from the assembly, to implement the institutional reforms, or accelerate the implementation of the institutional reforms. And for me, number 2 is empowering the African governance architecture. The same way that the African peace and security architecture has a protocol, I think we also need a protocol to the treaty that puts governance at the fore, so that we can actually take decisions and implement them.
All right, thank you. Prof, you have the last word today.
Africa agenda, from what I've seen, is bold and broad. But I like to just summarize what I think that's really important, and that's structural transformation. And also focus on people-centered development agenda. People-centered development agenda. And with that, then we can bring the regional centers blocks, East Africa, South Africa, West Africa, and North Africa, to work once we have that principle and committed to it.
All right, I think
it's been
Leila.
I think the time just goes by when you're conversing about critical conversations. Thank you
And
very
I
much.
know for you, it must have just gone too fast. This is your area of interest.
Well, you know,
I'm just in awe of the
we
wisdom.
didn't talk about these headlines. These are the headlines that derail what we're trying to do.
And I know this is something that, you know, is continuing to develop here in the country, and I think we'll be monitoring that very
But
closely.
they're side source
Right.
from what needed to be done.
Correct.
These are not what we need to focus on.
And I think it's a great conversation for the leaders to also discuss on Saturday and Sunday when they meet for the 36th summit. Thank you very much, Professor Noah Midamba, Dr. Fatma Ali, Professor Migai Akech. Thank you for joining us this morning. AM Live is what has been on air this morning, and we've been discussing my favorite topic.
Right.
Mama Africa.
Well, she calls herself Mama Africa, so all right, you better live up to that name. All right, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming this morning.
Thank
all right,
you.
this
Thank
is
you.
where we wrap up on AM Live, and your world will be coming up shortly with Winnie Lubembe. You don't want to miss that. Leila Mohammed, Zainab Ismail here. Thank you once again. Have yourself a good morning, good day.